November 13th, 1942. The gray waters off Guadalcanal ripple beneath a low-hanging dawn mist. On the deck of USS San Francisco, Chief Radio Man Thomas O'Leary squints at the radar console, his gloved hands trembling slightly from the chill. The hum of the ship's engines mixes with the static crackle of the SCR-270 radar as O'Leary traces the glowing blip moving steadily toward the fleet. The sea seems ordinary, yet O'Leary knows better. Hundreds of miles away, Japanese Zero fighters roar through the morning sky, expecting the element of surprise to work in their favor. But hidden in the humming electronics of the American fleet is a silent predator that has been learning to see the invisible. Lieutenant Commander James "Jimmy" Caldwell, standing beside him, leans in, eyes narrowing at the console. "Blips coming in fast," he mutters, voice taut. "Prepare the Wildcats for scramble." His words cut through the humid morning air like a blade. Below deck, aviators in flight suits are buckling into cockpits, the smell of oil and sweat thick as they ready themselves for a battle they cannot yet see. Across the Pacific, aboard the carrier Shokaku, Japanese pilot Lieutenant Hiroshi Nakamura adjusts his goggles and peers over the bow. "The Americans won't see us coming," he says with a quiet certainty. The ship rocks gently beneath him, the engines thrumming in anticipation. Stealth has always been a cornerstone of Japanese naval doctrine, especially in night raids. Surprise is assumed, a given in every strategic calculation. But this morning, that assumption will meet its first formidable test. The radar operator's voice crackles over the intercom. "Bearing 045, altitude 3,000, 25 miles. The officers on the bridge exchange glances. To them, 25 miles seems impossibly far, a distance over which aircraft should remain invisible until the last moment. Yet here it is, the approaching storm, visible on a green screen, every contour and movement illuminated in neon clarity. "Scramble Flight 12, intercept Vector 32, go," Caldwell orders. Within minutes, Grumman F-4F Wildcats roar down the wooden ramps of the San Francisco's flight deck. Pilots grip the yokes, engines growling like caged beasts. The sun rises slowly, casting long shadows over the deck, glinting off the metal fuselages, a flash of light that seems to mirror the sudden clarity offered by radar to the Americans. Below, O'Leary adjusts the frequency, tracking every movement. "They're coming in faster than expected," he murmurs. The blip pulses steadily, unwavering. It is impossible to hide from this unseen eye. And far above, Nakamura's formation begins to feel the weight of an unfamiliar vulnerability, a creeping realization that their carefully honed tactics might no longer hold the advantage. From the American perspective, this technological edge is thrilling, almost intoxicating. Radar allows the fleet to anticipate Japanese maneuvers hours, even miles, before they manifest visually. Pilots are vectored into intercepts with surgical precision. On the bridge, Caldwell allows himself a fleeting grin, a private acknowledgement of the quiet revolution happening in warfare, where unseen waves of radio signals dictate life or death before bullets even fly. Meanwhile, Nakamura's radio squawks with frantic updates from his wingmen. They knew we were coming," one voice stammers. The disbelief is palpable. Night raids, stealth approaches, surprise maneuvers, all the principles that had guided Japanese strategy across the Pacific suddenly feel obsolete. Yet the Americans do not gloat. They know every advantage is fleeting, every blip, every vector is a temporary insight, precious and fragile. And as the Wildcats lift into the sky, their silhouettes cutting into the early morning glow, they carry with them the silent electric confidence that they are now armed with a new sense, the ability to see what was once invisible. The first rounds of engagement are chaotic but brief. Tracers cut across the sky like fiery threads. Engines scream under duress, and the distant roar of Zeros mixes with the heavy rumble of American Corsairs. For the Japanese, the shock is immediate. Their attacks are predicted, countered before they can even strike. Nakamura fights to regain composure, looping his fighter in wide arcs, but everywhere he turns, the invisible hunter of radar guides the Americans. As the smoke of the first skirmish lifts, one fact becomes undeniable. The old rules no longer apply. The Pacific has changed. The sky, once a domain of stealth, now belongs to anyone who can master the unseen waves that stretch invisibly over the ocean, and the Japanese are only just beginning to understand the implications. November 13th, 1942. Somewhere over the Solomon Islands, Lieutenant Hiroshi Nakamura banks sharply, the Pacific wind whipping past his cockpit. Sweat stings his eyes beneath the goggles, and for the first time in his career, a gnawing doubt creeps in. Below him, the San Francisco and her sister ships move with uncanny coordination. From his vantage point, the carriers seem almost mundane, ships of steel slicing through turquoise waters. Yet in their routine movements lies a terrifying intelligence. Radar operators track every formation, every maneuver. The Americans know where they are before they themselves realize it. Commander Masahiro Yamada, aboard the Shokaku, clenches the edge of his map table. His knuckles whiten as he listens to frantic reports over the radio. They are intercepting our aircraft before visual range. How can this be? His voice is calm only on the surface. Beneath it simmers disbelief and anger. Night raids were supposed to be their strength, a weapon honed over years of experience. The Americans, Yamada realizes, have turned that advantage upside down. Nakamura's wingman, Petty Officer Second Class Kenji Mori, lets out a startled exclamation. "They're vectored on us. I can't shake them." The Japanese formation had approached under cover of distance, confident in the tactical advantage of stealth. But the invisible eye of radar had anticipated every movement, directing American fighters to intercept with precision. On the bridge of USS San Francisco, Caldwell studies the radar screen as if it were a living map of the enemy. Each blip corresponds to an aircraft, and each movement allows him to orchestrate a ballet of interception. Vector 310, Wildcats intercept at 15,000 feet. Timing, 12 seconds, he orders. His words are crisp, calculated, unhesitating. Every second counts. Every delay could cost lives. Meanwhile, high above, Nakamura pushes his Zero through a steep dive, attempting to throw off his pursuers, but the Wildcats follow, guided by invisible signals, their own engines roaring like thunder in the Pacific sky. Nakamura feels the grip of panic for the first time. Every tactic he learned, the wide loop, the sudden climb, the split S maneuver, seems anticipated. There is no escape. Back aboard Shokaku, radio chatter grows frantic. Yamada speaks into the microphone, his voice steady but edged with tension. All pilots, regroup. Avoid the American interceptors. We underestimated their detection range. Night tactics alone will not suffice. Across the waves, similar scenes unfold on other Japanese carriers. The sense of invincibility that had defined their operations is cracking under the new, unseen force of radar. On deck, American pilots experience a different kind of intensity. Ensign William "Billy" Harris flies his F-4F Wildcat with a mixture of adrenaline and calm focus. "I can see them on my scope before I can see them in the sky," he reports over the radio. The technology feels like an extension of his senses, allowing him to anticipate enemy movement in ways previously impossible. The exhilaration is tempered by the deadly reality of combat. Every engagement brings the specter of sudden death closer. Nakamura's hand shakes slightly on the control stick as tracer rounds streak past. He ducks low, skimming the waves, hoping to vanish beneath the radar horizon. But American pilots, guided by electronic eyes, swoop down in a pattern that seems preordained. "Impossible," he mutters, heart racing. "They see everything, before we even appear." Yamada watches the unfolding chaos with grim calculation. Japanese doctrine emphasized surprise, audacity, and initiative, but radar nullifies each of these pillars. Every approach, Every maneuver is anticipated, countered before it can achieve its intended effect. The American Navy, once a distant, largely unknown force, now wields a weapon that transforms strategy itself. Hours pass in a blur of motion, altitude changes, and split-second decisions. Pilots on both sides strain against the limits of their machines and their endurance. The ocean beneath them seems to pulse with the rhythm of the battle, reflecting the morning sun in sharp flashes off twisted metal and spray. For the Japanese, the psychological toll is immediate. Tactics that once ensured dominance now breed confusion and frustration. For the Americans, the advantage is exhilarating but demands absolute focus. One mistake, one lapse in coordination, could erase the technological edge. By the late afternoon, the first tangible results of radar-assisted operations are undeniable. Japanese aircraft that had expected to strike with impunity are either destroyed, damaged, or forced to retreat. On Shokaku, Yamada scribbles notes furiously, already beginning to rethink every engagement plan, every assumption about surprise attacks. The lesson is clear. Invisibility has been compromised. Nakamura, trailing a damaged wingman back toward the carrier, casts a long glance at the horizon. The Pacific sky, once his ally, now feels like a trap. The hum of radar, the unseen pulse of detection, has rewritten the rules of engagement. In the months to come, these lessons would ripple across every Japanese naval command. But for now, the shock is raw, immediate, and disorienting. November 14th, 1942. Aboard the battered Shokaku, the morning fog rolls in from the Solomon Sea like a living curtain. Lieutenant Hiroshi Nakamura leans against the cockpit bulkhead, eyes fixed on the horizon, still haunted by the previous day's events. Every maneuver he had relied upon, every loop, dive, and approach, had been predicted, countered, and neutralized. He cannot shake the image of American wildcats appearing as if from nowhere, guided by some invisible hand. Commander Masahiro Yamada gathers his senior officers in the cramped chart room. The smell of ink, oil, and sweat hangs thick in the air. Maps are spread across the table, dotted with hand-drawn lines and hastily calculated vectors. We underestimated them, Yamada begins, voice low but firm. Their technology allows them to see us miles before we can see them. This changes everything. One young navigator, Ensign Sato, raises a hand nervously. Sir, can they predict our approach at night as well? His question is more than theoretical. Night raids had been the Japanese specialty, the method through which stealth could overwhelm superior numbers. Yamada's face tightens. Yes, he admits. It seems the Americans can vector fighters toward us even in darkness. We must assume there is no place to hide. On the flight deck of USS San Francisco, the hum of radar operators fills the air, punctuated by the crisp, precise voice of Lieutenant Commander Caldwell. Contact at 22 miles, bearing 090, altitude 4,000. Wildcats scramble in 5. Intercept in progress. For the Americans, the technology feels almost preternatural, a gift that turns uncertainty into tactical dominance. Pilots grip their controls with a mixture of excitement and respect for the invisible instrument that guides them. Back with the Japanese, the realization is gut-wrenching. Their doctrine, built on decades of disciplined training, surprise, and audacity, is suddenly vulnerable. We cannot continue as before, Yamada tells his officers. Our tactics will no longer suffice. We must adapt. Plans are hastily revised. Night operations are reconsidered. Approach vectors are altered. Even formations, once rigidly disciplined for maximum striking power, are loosened in a desperate attempt to evade detection. Nakamura prepares for another sortie, a sense of unease gnawing at his concentration. His fingers hover over the throttle, mind replaying yesterday's chaos. We must fly lower, hug the terrain, he mutters to his wingman, Petty Officer Mori. Maybe then we can avoid their invisible eyes. Yet even as he speaks, a nagging thought persists. The Americans do not rely on sight alone. The hum of radar, the precise tracking of every blip, makes every maneuver, every feint, an open book. At Guadalcanal, radar operators are already learning to refine their techniques. They adjust frequencies, improve blip resolution, and coordinate with fighter squadrons with a speed and efficiency that feels like a well-rehearsed dance. Each engagement is a lesson in precision. One missed signal could mean aircraft lost. One delay could let the enemy escape. For Americans, radar is not merely a tool. It is a force multiplier that reshapes the very rhythm of combat. Nakamura's next mission is tense and measured. Low-altitude approaches replace high-speed dives. Pilots take risks with maneuvers that would have been unthinkable in normal conditions. Yet even with adaptation, the radar-guided Wildcats intercept with chilling reliability. Nakamura finds himself ducking and weaving not just to survive, but to understand the invisible hand that seems to dictate the battlefield. Commander Yamada convenes a final briefing before the next engagement. "We have fought with skill and courage," he tells his officers, voice grave. "But courage alone will not win battles against eyes that see through darkness. We must innovate. Night tactics, deception, and surprise must be recalibrated in ways we have never imagined." The weight of this admission presses down on everyone present. For the first time, Japanese strategy feels constrained by a technology they do not yet fully comprehend. Meanwhile, on American ships and airfields, radar operators and pilots sense a shift. The enemy is adapting, becoming more cautious, more unpredictable. Caldwell notes the subtle changes in approach patterns, the slight hesitation in enemy formations. "They're learning," he remarks quietly. "We have to stay one step ahead." In the Pacific skies above Guadalcanal, two forces begin a new invisible duel. One wields technology, the other tradition and courage, struggling to meet a threat that cannot be seen but is unmistakably felt. Each sortie, each radar sweep, each interception is a lesson in the evolving art of modern naval warfare. For Nakamura and his comrades, the shock of radar is still raw, but adaptation begins to stir. The process is messy, costly, and fraught with danger, but it is also the beginning of a grudging respect for the unseen power that the Americans have harnessed. In the months ahead, both sides will push their limits, innovating, countering, and redefining what it means to fight in a world where sight is no longer the only sense that matters. November 16th, 1942, Midway Atoll, pre-dawn. The Pacific sky is a slate-gray canvas, pierced only by the distant roar of American patrols. Lieutenant Commander Akira Tanaka, newly assigned to the carrier Hiryu, sits hunched over his map table, coffee cooling untouched at his elbow. His mind churns with calculations, probabilities, and contingencies, yet no formula seems sufficient to counter what he now calls the invisible eye. Radar, Tanaka knows, is more than technology. It is psychological warfare incarnate. Pilots report seeing nothing, yet being intercepted, forced into evasive maneuvers, and shot down with a precision that feels almost supernatural. The uncertainty gnaws at confidence. A Japanese aviator's bravado, honed through months of training and experience, falters when the enemy seems to anticipate every move. On the flight deck of USS Enterprise, Lieutenant Walter Wally Pierce adjusts his headset, tracking blips on the CXAM radar. Each pulse is a heartbeat, each echo a whisper of approaching danger. "Bearing 120, altitude 5,000. Intercept vector in 2 minutes," he reports. Pilots spring into action like clockwork. To them, radar is clarity. To their adversaries, it is terror incarnate, a force that erodes both strategy and spirit. Tanaka convenes a meeting with his squadron leaders. Every pilot who has flown against them reports the same. They know where we are before we see them. They anticipate our moves, counter our maneuvers. Morale is strained. Fear spreads faster than bullets. One officer, Lieutenant Sakamoto, leans forward, voice low and tight. "Sir, is it possible they can track us at night over hundreds of miles?" Tanaka's gaze is fixed, unblinking. "Yes, and until we adapt, every sortie will be a gamble against an enemy that can see through darkness itself." On Guadalcanal, radar has become more than a detection tool. It is a weapon that informs every tactical decision. Pilots rely on vectors from radar operators, coordinating approaches, intercepts, and engagement altitudes with precision previously unimaginable. Aircraft that once relied on instinct and visual spotting now operate under electronic guidance, transforming American operations into a science of anticipation and reaction. Nakamura, preparing for another night sortie, feels a hollow anxiety knotting his stomach. He checks his instruments obsessively, adjusts his throttle, and studies his maps. Every approach now feels compromised before it even begins. His squadron whispers about the radar, about being seen before seen, and the words echo in his mind like a curse. He knows that surviving another engagement is as much about psychological resilience as about flying skill. Yamada watches from the bridge of Shikaku, noting the subtle changes in his crews. Pilots hesitate at approaches they once would have executed without question. Navigators second-guess vectors. Even officers debate the merits of traditional formations versus new, untested evasive patterns. The discipline and confidence that define the Imperial Navy are fraying under the pressure of an unseen adversary, yet necessity breeds innovation. Yamada orders low-level approaches, deceptive maneuvers, and synchronized diversions designed to confuse radar operators. Flight patterns are staggered, formations deliberately spread to minimize detectability. Pilots learn to read the subtle signs of American interception: radio chatter, distant silhouettes, sudden engine roars, as new forms of sensory input, supplementing what radar cannot yet detect. It is improvisation born of desperation. On the American side, Caldwell notes these changes. "They're adjusting," he remarks to his officers. "We have to anticipate adaptation as much as we anticipate their aircraft." Radar remains the edge, but its advantage is no longer absolute. The invisible eye has forced the Japanese to rethink and the Americans to remain vigilant. Each engagement becomes a chess match, every pulse of the radar a move and counter-move in a high-stakes game of survival. As the sun sets over the Pacific horizon, painting the waters with streaks of blood orange and gold, both sides pause briefly, gathering for the next cycle of conflict. For Japanese pilots, the toll is more than material. It is the erosion of certainty, the mental strain of being perpetually anticipated. For Americans, it is a mixture of triumph and tension, knowing that technology grants them sight, but not invulnerability. In these days, radar does more than detect aircraft. It changes the very rhythm of warfare, reshapes doctrines, and tests the mettle of men on both sides. And as the Pacific night falls, Lieutenant Nakamura looks toward the horizon, haunted by the realization that the skies he once controlled are no longer solely his domain. The invisible hunter watches, always ready, and the war is evolving before his eyes. November 18th, 1942. Just before dawn, over the waters off Guadalcanal. Mist clings to the waves, carrying the smell of salt and diesel, as Lieutenant Hiroshi Nakamura's formation slices through the sky, engines thrumming like distant thunder. Their objective, a U.S. supply convoy nestled near Lunga Point. Stealth and surprise have always been their allies. Today, both are gone. On the bridge of USS San Francisco, Chief Radio Man O'Leary's fingers fly over the radar controls. "Contacts at bearing 080, 24 miles. Altitude 3,500, he reports, voice taut with urgency. Lieutenant Commander Caldwell studies the blips intently. "All Wildcats launch, intercept at 15,000, lead with Ensign Harris. Timing is critical. Don't let them get through." The Americans have grown confident in their radar-guided defenses. Every sortie is a symphony of coordination, aircraft vectored into position with precise timing, pilots guided by radio instructions, their attacks choreographed to counter enemy movements before they can strike. The Japanese, trained to expect the element of surprise, find themselves reacting instead of acting. Nakamura's formation dives toward the convoy, hoping that low altitude and speed can compensate for the unseen force that tracks them. His wingman, Petty Officer Kenji Mori, whispers over the intercom, "They know exactly where we are. I I don't understand. Nakamura clenches the stick, eyes darting for any opening, any flaw in American coordination. There is none. Above, radar-assisted Wildcats swoop into the Japanese formation with uncanny precision. Tracer rounds cut through the pre-dawn sky like lightning, engines roar in a deadly chorus, and chaos erupts. Nakamura's stomach twists as he executes evasive maneuvers he once practiced in simulators, now rendered almost useless. Every predictable loop, every dive, every feint is anticipated. Commander Yamada watches helplessly from the Shokaku, heart pounding. Reports come in over the radio. Several aircraft down, others retreating damaged. They are using that radar to orchestrate intercepts, he mutters under his breath. The concept is almost unimaginable. The idea that a fleet can anticipate every approach, vector fighters with mechanical precision, and nullify tactical surprise. The old rules of naval aviation, the reliance on stealth and audacity, crumble in real time. Meanwhile, USS San Francisco's flight deck is a controlled chaos of its own. Pilots climb into cockpits, engines growl, and radio operators relay continuous updates. Ensign Harris takes off, cutting across the sky like a streak of silver. The blips on the radar are translated into vectors that guide him with near telepathic accuracy. Every movement of the Japanese formation is countered before it can become a threat. Nakamura realizes that his only hope lies in improvisation. He orders a sudden split in formation, hoping to confuse the radar operators. 2 aircraft peel off, diving toward the coastline, hoping the terrain might shield them. Yet even then, American pilots anticipate the move, adjusting intercept vectors mid-flight. Radar doesn't just detect, it predicts patterns, reads formations, and transforms each action into a pre-calculated response. As the battle unfolds, the psychological weight becomes apparent. Japanese pilots are not just being fired upon, they are being outmaneuvered before the fight begins. Fear, frustration, and disbelief ripple through the formation. Nakamura fights to maintain focus, but the invisible force of radar, guiding every American decision, looms over them like a predator that never tires. By mid-morning, the engagement reaches a grim conclusion. Japanese losses are significant, supply lines disrupted, and retreat becomes the only viable option. On Shokaku, Yamada records the outcome with a mixture of shame and urgency. The lesson is stark. Radar has changed the battlefield, and the Japanese cannot rely solely on the tactics that once dominated the Pacific. For the Americans, victory feels both earned and fragile. They know that radar gives them an unprecedented edge, yet they also understand its limits. It does not replace judgment, courage, or coordination. It amplifies those qualities, turning human skill into decisive force. Pilots touch down on the flight deck, exhausted but exhilarated, aware that they are participating in a revolution in warfare. Above all, the battle cements a new reality. The Pacific skies, once a domain of stealth and unpredictability, now belong to those who can see what others cannot. Radar has shifted the balance, but it is only the beginning. Both sides will adapt, innovate, and counter, and the war will continue to evolve in ways that no single pilot, commander, or ship can fully anticipate. For Lieutenant Nakamura, every sortie thereafter carries the memory of being hunted by the invisible eye. Every maneuver is now informed by caution, every engagement shadowed by uncertainty. The psychological toll is profound, yet it also sparks a grudging respect for the power that the Americans wield. A lesson paid for in blood, courage, and the relentless pulse of the Pacific War. December 2, 1942. Aboard the USS Enterprise, the Pacific wind bites through the morning mist. Lieutenant Walter Wally Pierce wipes condensation from the radar screen and leans closer, eyes scanning the blips that pulse like living creatures. The Americans have begun refining radar operations, improving detection resolution, coordinating air patrols, and integrating fighter direction with near-telepathic efficiency. Every engagement teaches lessons, and every lesson is swiftly applied. On the Japanese side, Commander Masahiro Yamada convenes a high-level staff meeting aboard the Hiryu. The room hums with tension and determination. "The Americans now see us miles before we arrive," he says, voice cutting through the stale air. "Our previous strategies are compromised. If we are to strike effectively, we must innovate. New tactics, new aircraft formations, and perhaps even technology to counter this invisible force." Our radar, it seems, has triggered a technological arms race in the Pacific. Japanese engineers work feverishly to develop radar detectors and signal jamming devices, attempting to cloak their approaches or disrupt the American systems. Pilots like Lieutenant Hiroshi Nakamura are briefed on new procedures, low-altitude ingress, staggered formations, and deceptive maneuvers designed to confuse radar operators. Yet even as these adaptations take shape, the psychological weight of being hunted by unseen eyes remains palpable. In the skies over Guadalcanal, American pilots have grown accustomed to the rhythm of radar-guided warfare. Ensign Harris leads a flight of Wildcats on an early morning patrol, guided by precise vectors from the radar console. "Contact at 20 miles bearing 105, Pierce calls out. Harris adjusts his approach, banking sharply to intercept. The choreography is almost effortless, a testament to the integration of human skill and electronic intelligence. Meanwhile, Japanese aviators attempt their first experimental nighttime raid with radar countermeasures in place. Nakamura tightens his grip on the control stick, muscles tense. They fly at treetop level, hoping to slip beneath radar coverage. But even with these adjustments, the Americans anticipate their movements. Wildcats appear like phantoms in the moonlit sky, guided by operators who have learned to predict Japanese evasive patterns. The psychological impact on the Japanese pilots is severe. Lieutenant Mori, flying alongside Nakamura, mutters into his headset, voice tight with frustration. "It doesn't matter what we do. They see everything." Morale begins to fray. Pilots who once approached missions with audacious confidence now hesitate, second-guessing every maneuver. The fear of being intercepted before striking becomes an ever-present shadow. Commander Yamada watches his pilots adapt in real time. Each sortie is a learning process. Some maneuvers succeed, others fail spectacularly. The Japanese begin to understand that survival now depends on both ingenuity and luck. Low-altitude approaches, staggered timing, and decoy aircraft become part of a growing arsenal of countermeasures, yet none can fully neutralize the radar advantage. For the Americans, radar remains both a shield and a sword. Caldwell and his officers analyze every engagement, looking for subtle shifts in Japanese tactics. Every intercepted formation, every damaged aircraft provides data to refine vector calculations, anticipate evasive maneuvers, and improve response times. The integration of technology and human decision-making turns each sortie into an increasingly efficient operation. In these months, Guadalcanal becomes a proving ground for the future of naval warfare. Radar has reshaped strategy, doctrine, and psychology. Commanders on both sides realize that control of the skies now requires mastery, not just of aircraft and tactics, but of the invisible waves of energy that dictate the tempo of battle. Technology has redefined risk, recalibrated surprise, and transformed anticipation into a weapon. By mid-December, the cumulative effect is undeniable. Japanese raids are less effective, American interception rates climb, and supply lines are better protected. Radar is no longer experimental. It is decisive. Nakamura, returning from a failed sortie, lands with a mix of exhaustion and grim realization. The invisible eye that had first shocked him months earlier now dominates every engagement, and the Pacific War has entered a new, more relentless phase. For both sides, the lesson is clear. Mastery of technology is inseparable from mastery of strategy. Radar has changed everything, forcing innovation, adaptation, and courage to operate in tandem. And in the Pacific theater, where the vast expanse of ocean offers both sanctuary and peril, the side that controls what cannot be seen gains a decisive advantage, one that will shape the course of battles and define the very nature of modern warfare. December 24th, 1942. A cold dawn blankets the waters near Guadalcanal. Lieutenant Hiroshi Nakamura sits alone in the cockpit of his Zero, engines idling, the hum of the Pacific around him. His hands tremble slightly as he unclasps his goggles. The sky above is empty for now, but he knows that at any moment the invisible hunter could appear, an unseen force that has haunted every sortie, every maneuver, every plan since November. The psychological toll of radar on Japanese pilots is profound. Fear has replaced instinct. Hesitation has replaced audacity. Pilots report nightmares of blips on screens that track their every move, even when the physical sky appears calm. Lieutenant Mori confides in Nakamura, voice barely audible over the hum of the engine. We fight the sky, but also something we cannot see. It's like being hunted by ghosts. Yamada and his officers note the growing strain. Courage alone is no longer sufficient. Each mission exacts a mental price, and morale teeters on the edge of collapse. Across the American fleet, the human cost is felt differently. Radar operators, often young men barely out of training, bear the responsibility for life and death with unrelenting focus. Ensign Harris, after a grueling 12-hour patrol, collapses into the flight deck bunks, radio headset still clutched in hand. Every blip, every decision, it's on us, he mutters, exhaustion and adrenaline tangled in his voice. The technology provides sight, yet it also magnifies the stakes, transforming human skill into a relentless, almost surgical execution of duty. Despite the strain, radar reshapes the very fabric of the Pacific War. Japanese tactics evolve slowly, incorporating low-level approaches, staggered formations, and early attempts at electronic countermeasures. Americans refine vector guidance, improve radar resolution, and coordinate increasingly complex intercept patterns. Guadalcanal becomes a laboratory of innovation, a theater where technology, strategy, and human endurance intersect. The long-term consequences are profound. Japanese naval doctrine must be rewritten, emphasizing stealth that accounts for electronic detection, flexibility that anticipates predictive engagement, and psychological resilience against a foe that seems to see before it acts. American forces, meanwhile, learn the value of integrating technology with human decision-making, demonstrating that radar is not a replacement for skill, but a force multiplier when combined with courage, coordination, and discipline. In quiet moments, pilots on both sides reflect on what has changed. Nakamura stares at the horizon, voice barely a whisper. The sky is no longer ours alone. We are part of a battle we cannot see, and yet it controls every move we make. On the USS San Francisco, Caldwell reviews patrol reports, noting not only victories but patterns of adaptation by the Japanese. Technology is only part of the fight, he tells his officers. Understanding how the enemy reacts to it is just as critical. By the end of 1942, the Pacific Campaign has entered a new era. Radar has shifted the balance, transforming strategy, tactics, and morale. Battles are no longer won solely by numbers or bravery. Mastery of the invisible realm of electronic detection has become decisive. Guadalcanal and Midway serve as proof that innovation, when combined with skill and human resilience, can reshape warfare itself. For Japanese pilots, the lesson is harsh but enduring. Stealth and surprise, once their greatest weapons, are no longer guarantees. For American sailors and aviators, the triumph is tempered by understanding. Technology amplifies human capability, but demands constant vigilance, coordination, and courage. In the vast, open waters of the Pacific, where the horizon stretches endlessly, the invisible eye of radar continues to watch, to guide, and to redefine the very nature of combat. And in that realization lies the enduring legacy of these early battles, a recognition that modern warfare is as much about anticipation, perception, and adaptation as it is about firepower, speed, or valor.